Fine.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kate Angelo. I'm with the Long Branch Public Library. With me today is Bryce Morris. He's currently a junior writing arts major attending Rowan University. He writes for online blogs as well as a creative marketing agency, and he aspires to become a professional author, which we love to hear at the library. He's prepared a presentation today focused on Black representation in comics through history. His presentation is the first in a year-long series we have titled Our Story. Each month, we'll offer a unique look into Black history and Black lives. Our next installment will be February 11th, when we will speak to Dr. Birgitta Johnson, a professor of ethnomusicology at the University of South Carolina, for her program, Singing Our Story, Soundtracks of Resistance, Protest, and Affirmation in Black Music. Right now, I have the pleasure of welcoming Bryce and inviting him to begin his presentation.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Welcome. So you should be okay to share your screen.
Okay. Do that. Okay, let's just get it started. Now I know not everyone is aware of many Black superheroes out there. I know everyone knows Spider-Man, the X-Men, and those Batman, but I'm here today to educate everyone on Black representation in comics, characters, storylines, and yeah, let's just get right into it. And to truly understand Black representation in comics, we have to go back to the early days at the beginning. And Black characters in comics pre the 40s and 50s era, while they existed, they were largely seen as inferior or run-of-the-mill companions of the white protagonist. But come the 1940s, the fad would finally begin to change. And Atlas Comics, who I'm sure you know today as Marvel's, Waku, Prince of the Bantu, who was a South African prince as well as a skilled fighter with jungle knowledge, would hold the title of becoming the first Black character in mainstream comics. But Waku was not the title, it was instead Jungle Tales. And it would take 1965's Western hero Lobo, who was published by Dell Comics, who are now defunct. And they were virtually sort of like the Marvel of their time for a Black comic character to headline his own title. Okay. And now that we touched a little bit on at the beginning, I want to talk about Black representation more so behind the scenes in comics, a few publishers. And the first that we're going to talk about is All Negro Comics, founded by journalist Orrin C. Evans, who beforehand wrote for the Black-owned Philadelphia Tribune, as well as the Philadelphia Record. And Evans had a lifelong passion of cartoons and artwork, so it was only natural when his days at the Record were over that he would then move into comics. And along with a handful of writers who he worked with at the Philadelphia Record that he would bring forward, he would start All Negro Comics, which was the first mainstream comic book publication to be written as well as drawn by African Americans. And All Negro focused mainly on anthology-based stories. We would have the typical superheroics and fantastical elements that you're used to seeing in comics, but you would also have prevalent issues surrounding Blacks in America. And a more recent publication, that we're going to focus on next is Milestone Comics, which is founded by the late Dwayne McDuffie, as well as Dennis Cohen, Michael Davis, and Derek T. Dingle. And while Milestone initially began as a subsidiary of DC Comics, the creatives involved were given tons of creative freedom as well as the opportunity tackle subject matter that they just couldn't do in the standard DC line of books. And McDuffie's main goal with Milestone was to focus on expanding the comics medium beyond the established Spider-Man, Batman, Superman fare, and create new Black heroes while also providing opportunities for Black artists and writers. And some of McDuffie's biggest contributions to comics were the teenage superhero Static Shock, Hardware, and a multiracial Avengers type of group called Blood Syndicate. All right, and we're gonna start off superhero diversification off with the first Black superhero African descent, which is the King of Wakanda, T'Challa the Black Panther. And Black Panther would quickly come on the scene with Fantastic Four number 52 in 1966, where the character would again revolutionize how Black heroes could be seen in comic books. As one, he was the king of his own isolated country in Africa, which is a lot more technologically advanced than anything on the world. Two, he was smarter than the large majority of Marvel's characters. Take Iron Man, Mr. Fantastic, Bruce Banner, he's smarter than all of them. Not to mention the wealthiest in Marvel, even more than Tony Stark. And Black Panther's introduction would only pave the way for Sam Wilson, the Falcon, who was Captain America's longtime partner, who would eventually transition into the role of Captain America himself years later. And around the same time, the 1970s would see a rise in Blaxploitation movies with Shaft starring Richard Roundtree, Foxy Brown with Pam Grier. And it was a revolutionary, albeit maybe a little dated today, new genre that broke the conventional stereotype of Black characters on film and made them much more authentic and accessible for audiences. And as a result of that, we had Marvel's Luke Cage, who became the first Black superhero to receive his own ongoing title, Luke Cage Hero for Hire. And Cage would begin his career as Carl Lucas, a man wrongly accused of a crime and sent to prison, where he was experimented on and given superpowers, becoming the police and supervillain's worst nightmare, Unbreakable Black Man. And meanwhile, DC would also begin diversifying with their own Black superheroes as well, with John Stewart, the newest Green Lantern, and Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning. And John Stewart was a former U.S. Marine from Detroit, and as well as DC's first Black superhero, and honestly, one of the first Black superheroes I ever saw, as he had a major role in the Justice League cartoon series that did air on Cartoon Network in the early 2000s that I grew up with. So that was kind of sort of my first exposure to a Black superhero early on. And Black Lightning Jefferson Pierce was a world-class athlete as well as a teacher with a degree in physics, and led the urban education reform and came into possession of a power belt, which granted him the ability to manipulate electricity, ionize atoms and molecules, create force fields, and move at the speed of light. And with Black Lightning, his legacy is still being felt today with the show on CW, which has been on the air since 2018 and actually starts airing its last season in just a few weeks. You might want to check that out. Okay. Moving on, we have, while the Avengers and the Fantastic Four are typically portrayed often celebrated for their heroism, the X-Men on the other hand is the exact opposite. They're hated and feared just because of how they were born and how they look. They're virtually the black sheep of the Marvel universe. And with the movies, while they have done justice to their powers and the character representation, they haven't really pushed the mutant metaphor as far as they can. And beyond the social commentary, the X-Men are also one of the most diverse teams in comics, as they house several women and Black characters. The most prominent and popular being Aurora Monroe, who I'm sure you know as Storm. And Storm has been a key member of the X-Men team since the early 70s. And she's hooked readers with her unique power set and the fact that she was a female Black character leading the X-Men in Marvel. And which brings us to Cyclops, who is typically the leader, but sometimes he may have to go off and do his own thing. So when he does that, it's Storm who's going to be in command. And taking it back a little bit to the 60s, even at the start of the X-Men, while the X-Men did start in the 60s, like the 60s run was really what laid the foundation for the series. Like those issues like only revolved around a group of white teenagers in upstate New York, one girl in Jean Grey, and it wasn't until the 1970s when the book really began to kick off and become much more diverse and fully embrace that the metaphor that people has really resonated with people today. And a part of this has to go to two of the series' most important characters, who are Professor X, the leader of the X-Men, and on the other side of that, you have Magneto, Professor X's former friend, now enemy, who is a victim of the Holocaust and believes of another coming Holocaust, but this time targeted on mutants. And with Professor X and Magneto's different ideologies, many have come to the conclusion, many fans have come to the conclusion over the years that the two may have been loosely inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, loosely. And even X-Men co-creator Stan Lee has clarified that the thought never actually came to his mind during the creation of the characters, but he has admitted over the years that certain characters, there are parallels between certain characters. All right. And prior to 1967's Love v. Virginia case, interracial marriage in the United States was a major no, it just was not happening. And for those who need context, Richard Lovin, who was white, and his wife Mildred Lovin, who was black, were arrested shortly after their wedding because of the fact, and were forced to relocate to Washington, D.C., where the couple would have children, but as a result, they became social outcasts. But luckily, with a referral from Robert F. Kennedy, actually, the Lovins began a lengthy legal battle, which became the Lovin v. Virginia case. And as a result, comics would then be allowed to add this real world development into their characters. And to start off, we have the martial artist Danny Rand, who was also known as Iron Fist, who would get together with the no-nonsense Misty Knight, who was a supporting character in the Luke Cage book. And as I mentioned earlier, this is only just the start. And as Luke Cage himself would actually find love in a superhero private investigator, Jessica Jones, you may have heard from the Netflix show. And even before that, the 80s would see Cloak and Dagger into the scene. And Cloak and Dagger were two actually teenage runaways from home named Tyrone Johnson and Tandy Bowen, who would become intertwined after they would leave their homes and were kidnapped by the mob actually and forced to become test subjects for a new experimental drug. But instead of killing the two teens, the drugs, as what tends to happen in comics, gives Tyrone and Tandy superpowers, and they start hunting down drug dealers and supervillains through New York City. And while the first years of Cloak and Dagger comics, they weren't too explicit on the relationship between the two, other writers throughout the years have made the relationship the romance between the two much more apparent and explicit. And while they Cloak and Dagger haven't had a movie released yet, they did have a series on Freeform that ran for a few years. Okay. Now I want to move on from comic book superheroes for just a little bit and focus on some real behind the scenes heroes who made Black representation in comics a lot more accessible for everyone involved. And first up is Christopher Priest, who was born James Christopher Owsley, who became a full-time editor at Marvel and essentially became the company's first Black writer and editor in mainstream comics as well. And after writing at Marvel for years, he would then have to lead away to work on their most popular character, who was Black Panther. And Priest would begin his run on Black Panther in 1998. And while Black Panther was popular at the time, he was on the Avengers. He wasn't a fan favorite as he is today. And but with Priest's run, Priest would redefine the character and make him cool for the 2000s. And even going a few decades over to the movie, 2018 movie, many elements from the movie debuted in Priest's run, such as Everett Ross, who you may remember as a CIA agent who helps T'Challa, Wakanda's primary guard, female guard, the Dora Milaje, made up of their deadliest warriors, and even T'Challa himself being more of a political leader other than a superhero, all began in that run. And then, of course, there's Dwayne McDuffie, who founded Milestone Media along with Priest and other Black writers. And like Priest, McDuffie had an early start at Marvel Comics, co-creating the cleanup agency, superhero cleanup agency, Damage Control, in the early 80s. And he was allowed the opportunity to work on several other properties and characters from both DC and Archie even. But at the same time, McDuffie, he still had a goal in mind to work on Black superheroes and characters. So in 1993, he would go on to create the teenage superhero I mentioned earlier, Static, and he would receive his own animated show on Kids WB in the 2000s, which I grew up with and loved. All right. And back to Warren Evans, as I talked about earlier, he began All Negro Comics, and after that, he was hailed as the father of Black comic. And even more recently, we have Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has been a name that's become intricately connected with comic books as well. As he's an essayist, journalist, and writer, Coates often examines race relationships between individuals in his works, such as his 2015 book, Between the World and Me, which I did have a chance to read over the summer and liked a lot. And with that book, it was a great sort of examination of Coates' earlier years at Howard University, as well as raising his teenage son amidst the backdrop of everyday racism, really. And Coates' Fear of a Black President essay for The Atlantic and The Case for Reparations really earned him several awards, including his current job at Marvel. And Coates was initially tasked with reinvigorating Black Panther in 2016, which is 2 years prior to the movie. And it was a great matchup as Coates' run on Black Panther would become the best-selling comic of April that year, which I'm sure Marvel and him were happy about, and led to him being the current writer of Captain America comics today. And the last Black comic pioneer I just wanted to highlight is the cartoonist and writer Ed Magruder, who was a University of Maryland graduate, developed the comic strip The Boondocks in his university's own student newspaper, The Diamondback, in the late 90s, 1997, which revolved around young brothers, Huey and Riley, in their neighborhood of Woodcrest. The Boondocks quickly developed into a racial and political satire, which, as anything will, garnered much praise and controversy before it was adapted for a late night show on Adult Swim, started in 2005 and ran for 5 seasons. And there's 4 seasons. And there's even talk of a HBO Max reboot in the works, actually. And while the Diamondback with the Boondocks, Diamondback would initially let the book go, and Magruder would have to move on to other publishers to actually get the book published in over 200 publications. So the Boondocks was not an overnight success by any means. However, since the success of the Boondocks, Magruder has gone on to write the movie Red Tails, which revolves around the Tuskegee Airmen, who were all black fighter pilots in World War II. All right. Before I move on, I just want to show a short little video from theroot.com, just highlighting some comics by Black creators. I'm just going to put the sound up. If you have trouble hearing, you just let me know. And yeah, I'm just going to share the sound.
Hi, I'm Terry Gant, owner of Third Coast Comics in Chicago, and I'm here with graphic novels by Black creators featuring Black characters that I think are totally worth your support. first up is The Banks by Roxane Gay. It is the story of a multi-generational family of thieves on the south side of Chicago, and they have a chance at one last score that can pull the whole family back together. Then there is Black by Kwanzaa Osejefo and Jamal Igle, who I've been a fan of for a long time. Imagine that the government's biggest secret is that only Black people have the ability to gain superpowers. Next up would be Bitter Root by David Walker and Sanford Green. It's sort of a Black Big Trouble in Little China meets Ghostbusters. A family of monster hunters has to save Harlem from a new threat that's come to Harlem. But not only do they have to eliminate said monster threat, but they also have to heal the souls of the people who've been afflicted by it. It's a super hyperkinetic, high energy book. Really good. Then there's a romance comic called Bingo Love by T. Franklin. It is the story of two women who, when they're kids, they fall in love, but due to family pressures, they can't be together. And then they reunite 50 years later. It's a really great romance story, really touching. It's pretty cool. I like it. Then there's a bit of nonfiction. There is Big Black Stand at Attica by Frank Big Black Smith, who was a prisoner at Attica State Prison in 1971, and it's about what he and his fellow inmates went through in the search for humane conditions and human rights. And it really does illustrate the power of comics to show the human condition and bring that all kind of full circle into light, so you can see it's not just words and pictures on the screen. You can actually bring real human tragedy, the fight for human rights, the fight for equality. Right? This book illustrates all that. It does it pretty well. I like it. I'm glad it's in my shop. I'm happy to sell it. Well, that's been graphic novels that I think you should support that are by Black creators and featuring Black characters. And this has been me, Terry Gant, from Third Coast Comics at 6443 North Sheridan Road in Chicago. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Okay. So moving on, we have a chart showcasing racial diversity in comics through the years, starting from 1940 to last year, 2020, between Marvel and DC. And as you can see with the chart, racial diversity is gradually increasing with 1940 and 1945. You see the steady change. And then if you go to 1965 to 1978, you can see it increase even more. And then as you get to around 2000, 2005, and then eventually to 2010 to 2020, it increases even more. And while Black representation in comics is definitely at a much better place than the 40s, as with anything, there's always room for improvement. Okay. And today we have the comic book medium. It continues to expand as more and more characters are introduced, and which becomes more and more accessible for its readers and creators as well. In 2011, we'll see the introduction of Marvel's newest Spider-Man, the Black Latino teenager, Miles Morales, who was also bitten by a radioactive spider and given many of the same abilities as the original Peter Parker, with some key differences. And then in 2015, we'll see Nyla Magruder write A Year of Marvel September Infinite Comic #1, which will make her actually the first female Black writer to write for Marvel. And in that same year, we had Marvel introduce Lunella Lafayette, aka Moon Girl, who was a inhuman, basically a race of evolved human beings who got their start in the 60s with Fantastic Four. And Lunella was actually a take on an original character from the 70s. Moon Boy went on prehistoric adventures with a dinosaur. That's good stuff. And she would make the world her own, as she was a Black character, 9 years old, and smarter than the Earth's most intelligent man, Mr. Fantastic. And as I talked a little bit about it earlier, Falcon, Captain America's longtime partner, Sam Wilson, will take up the mantle of Captain America in 2014. And meanwhile, DC, Marvel's main competitor, they would also continue to make strides in their diverse catalog and characters as well. Starting with Wally West, aka Kid the Flash, who was the Flash's teenage partner since around the 50s, but since the 50s, he's been a traditionally a white character. So he would be reimagined as a black teenager for comics in 2014. Then the following year for TV with the Flash TV show that airs on the CW. And moving a few years later to 2018, saw the release of the like a Fantastic Four-esque team named the Terrifics, who were led by Michael Holt, aka Mr. Terrific, who aside from having one of the smartest minds in DC, he was a master martial artist, gymnast. He could speak multiple languages, and he was a billionaire. So he was living it pretty good. And while we're on 2018, I just want to talk about Victor LaValle's Destroyer, which is a modern take on the classic Frankenstein story, which has all the tropes and definitely homages the classic tale for fans with the horror and suspense, but includes some very hard-hitting social commentary pertaining to race and our current climate. I did have the chance to actually read it during my graphic novel class in my sophomore year, and I really enjoyed it. So if you have the chance to go to the library and pick it up, I definitely recommend. All right. Now, unfortunately, Marvel didn't have the best year in 2017, and part of the blame went to their catalog of new, diverse characters, with America Chavez, the Latin American, the Pakistani Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, and Iron Man's own Black teenage successor, Riri Williams, who was Ironheart. And a major part of this had to go to comic books in general, just being like not the most original commodity. Like many companies would much rather focus on characters who were sold for years for the beginning. They're much more established characters instead of risking it all with new characters who may cost them money in that regard. So it's definitely a roadblock in Black representation in comics. And though Hollywood may have thought otherwise a few years back, Black superheroes actually make for like great movies. And for any fans of Blank Man, Meteor Man, those kinds of movies, like I'm just telling you now, this won't be on here, so just getting out the way. And start off, we're gonna start with 1997 Spawn, which while not the best way to start out, and being based on the Image Comics assassin turned demon. Spawn was one of the first comic book movies starring a Black superhero named Michael Jai White, which wasn't played for laughs, depending on who you ask. And while it did end up underperforming in both box office and critical performance, Blade, which was released a year later in 1998, which starred Wesley Snipes as the half vampire who goes around the world hunting other vampires, definitely made up for that. As it was a major success. It brought in over 170 million in the United States and over 100 million overseas worldwide. And while not a lot of people get Blade its proper credit today, because superhero movies are releasing virtually like every week now. So and many people like to credit Spider-Man, which came out in 2002, as being the movie that really kicked off the Renaissance, but it was actually Blade. And almost 2 decades later, Hollywood's adaptations of Black superheroes would only continue to expand and get even better. And while he wasn't the title character, Marvel would finally bring its first African-American superhero to their movies with Captain America: The Winter Soldier in 2014, with Anthony Mackie in the role of Sam Wilson Falcon. And he continues to play the role today, actually, and will be the star of his own Disney Plus series, Falcon and Winter Soldier, in just a few months. Can't wait for it. And then 2016 and 2018 will bring two of Marvel and DC's most iconic Black heroes and influential Black heroes on the small screen, Luke Cage and Black Light. And in 2018, while it may have gone a little under the radar, saw the release of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as well, which while it was animated and a little more kid-friendly, it still managed to pack a whole lot of action, heart, and a great Miles Morales into a movie that was only an hour and 57 minutes. So it definitely had an impact. And of course, I can't talk about Black media with adaptations without discussing the most successful Black superhero movie film Black Panther, which was released in 2018 and was the most important in my regard, in my opinion, and as it starred a primarily Black cast, had a Black writer and director attached, and it had a superhero who meant so much to everyone around the world, in Chadwick Boseman, who embodied the Black Panther role perfectly. And these films have only continued to show studios that they're really, like, there is an audience for Black superheroes on screen. Like it's not past eras where Hollywood would just ignore these characters. No, people do want to see Black superheroes on screen and in movies and TV, and they will definitely continue to expand as the years go on. And because of all this huge success, of course, a reboot of Blade is on the way, as well as live action debuts for Ironheart and Static Shock. So what did we talk about today? We talked about the state of Black superheroes in comics presently, disadvantages which prevent Black heroes from representation in comics, as well as creators behind the scenes, influential creators and publishers, and various TV and movie projects based on these superhero properties and characters. So in retrospect, the next time you happen to read a comic featuring Black characters, just take a moment to think about the history, really, and difficulties it took these creators to get these characters on the page, because it was definitely a struggle for all of this to happen. So yeah. All right. And since everyone was wise and decided to stay till the end of the credits, here's just a little post-credit scene just showcasing the social impact of Black comics and heroes throughout the years. Again, I'm gonna make sure the sound is shared, so if you can't hear, just let me know and I will fix that.
When I was a kid growing up reading Marvel Comics, there was like 5 primary Black characters. There was Luke Cage, there was Falcon, there was Black Panther, and if you really wanted to stretch, there was Misty Knight and there was Storm. And that was over 40 years ago. And now there is Luke Cage, Falcon, Misty Knight, right. Storm, Black Panther. Not much has changed.
As a kid, seeing Luke Cage on the shelf, it was life-changing for me. It made me realize that, wait a minute, you mean to tell me this brown person, he's able to do some of the things that I saw Captain America do. And we're at this place and time in our culture and our society where, we're starving for it.
Just sitting at a con, you see other adult African American males come up to you, and they're not really comic book fans, but they kind of wander into the con to see what's going on, and they get excited to see us because we represent them, representation, and that's why it's so important.
And then the adults bring their kids around, right. And then it becomes, you could do this someday.
They see themselves in us.
Any questions?
Bryce, if you just stop sharing your screen, if
Okay.
somebody has questions, because everybody's muted, I'll have to
Okay,
unmute
no problem.
them. Let me just find that. So if anyone has any questions, you can just click the raise hand feature and I will unmute you. While we wait, Bryce, thank you so much. That was so
course.
informative.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Oh, we've got something in our Q&A. The question is, what do you think the future of comics will be in the next 10 years?
I think the future of comics will be in the next decade, next 10 years will be a very diverse place. I think as we're seeing now with new characters such as I talked about in the presentation, Miles Morales and Kamala Khan, who's even getting a TV show on Disney Plus coming soon later this year. I think everyone around the world wants to see themselves represented as superheroes and just comic book characters in any way. And I think comic book companies are now realizing that it's very important to represent that and really like deliver that to people and just just influence another generation. Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you think that we will no longer have physical copies of books, of comics, and will it all go online?
That's a great question. I think now with digital comics now being very popular, I think there may be a possibility in the next decade. But I think for right now, there's like a certain like novelty to comic book stores. You just walk in, they have not just comic books, they have certain like collectibles and shirts and figures. So I think for right now, I think just there's always going to be certain people that will always like sort of adhere to comic book stores instead of just online comics.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to just weigh in really quick. Absolutely, because comics have their own culture.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Books going online is a question at the library we face like every day. And every time we think, oh no, this is it, ebooks are going to take over, tons of people come through our door for regular real books. So and do you think as an up and coming author going online will be an option? Or I guess maybe is it well, you can answer it.
An up and coming author going online be an option. I think yes, I think that will be an option actually, as online writers with I think with journalism too, especially because I actually write online for Screen Rant. So I think like just starting out online, just kind of getting your foot in the door. I think that will definitely be an option. As maybe even if you don't want to write online for say the rest of your life, you can just start out online and just kind of get some experience before and kind of branching off into doing other things. So I think that yes, it will be. It's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, I have another one. How long have you been writing online?
Writing online. I've been writing online for about 2 years. I started writing online actually with my college's not a newspaper, online site, The Odyssey. Just writing kind of entertainment news about movies and TV shows, that sort of thing. And then I spent a year doing that. Then I would go off and write for Screen Rant, which I'm writing for right now, which is I'm kind of writing about the same thing: comics, movies, TV shows. So I've been writing for about 2 years online. Yeah.
Great. I have a follow-up question actually. Do you, as someone who aspires to be an author, do you hope to do sort of journalism like what you're doing now, basically, or more on the end of fiction and novels or comics?
Yeah, it's a great question. Journalism, I'm definitely considering it because I do kind of want to kind of have that experience of just, even if it's not just like interviewing people, just kind of just writing about different topics beyond comics and movies and entertainment, and just having that sort of experience and applying it to maybe something I do later down the line. So
Mhm.
yes, I do.
Cool. And we have another follow-up question. Did you do any of that in high school? So I guess, did you get your start while you were in high school?
I didn't write professionally in high school, kind of like online, like I'm doing now, but I did write my own sort of stories and kind of fan fiction kind of thing, if you want to call it, in high school with stories. So that's really where I really wanted to realize where I wanted to take that I wanted to take this seriously and really like evolve with it. Oh, yes. Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay.
Anything else?
Wait a moment and see if any others come
Yeah,
in.
I'm sure.
And for anyone interested, if you want to go back, we are recording this. It will be up on the library's YouTube page, so you can go back and listen again, or if you think you missed anything, or share it with your friends. Okay,
Yeah.
looks like no more questions. So I just want to thank
Yeah.
everyone for joining us. Special thanks to you, Bryce, for
Thank
putting
you.
together the presentation. Again, so informative. Thank you for sharing your knowledge.
You're welcome.
If anyone's interested in learning about other programs we're hosting at the library or virtually through the library, you can visit our website. It's longbranchlib.org, or find us on any social media platform. We're on all of them.
Oh yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mr. Angelo,
Okay.
but I had another slide actually after this. Actually,
Go
there's
ahead.
one more, which is just talking about me again. I'm a writing arts major at Rowan, and I'm writing for Screen Rant. But if anyone has like any sort of other questions that maybe come up in their minds later on and want to ask, I have my email right here, which is briceband1@gmail.com. And
I have that email too, actually. Let me share our ending slide here real quick. Okay, so this has my information, Bryce's information, and I believe for attending, you'll get an email bumped from us. I believe our survey's in there. That's sort of a long link to to jot down right now. So, but we do have a survey we ask attendees to fill out.
yeah, and I also left down here too page my Instagram if you're curious about other things I write for besides Screen Rant, where I do weekly reviews for movies, shows, news, trailers, comics. So if you're interested in that, that's gonna be right down there. And also down here, this thing disappears. If it,
Bryce, I think so you're not shared. If you want to share that so people can see your
okay,
your Instagram.
gotcha. Yeah. All right, my Instagram is right here. It is Obsessive Fanboy with 2 S's in the beginning. It's intentional. And yeah, I'll just leave it right here. And yeah, I talk about basically the same things I really talk about on Screen Rant: comic reviews, movie news, trailer reviews, weekly kind of throwback Thursdays too. So it's if you're interested, you know, you can always, it's gonna be right there. And right below that, I left a link to a free 30-day trial of Comixology Unlimited. You know, if you're interested in any of the books you saw in the videos and you just want to check them out, maybe the link to that will be right here. And you can cancel anytime in the 30-day trial, so you're free to do it whatever you want. And Yeah, that's it.
Okay, looks like we have one last question that came in.
Okay.
Have you heard of Thrill League?
I haven't. No, I have not. Is that a comic?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know. I'll definitely check it out.
Awesome. All right, at this time, I want to again thank everybody for coming, and we look forward to having more installments of this series, and we'll keep in touch and keep on top of Bryce's career here.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.